Alright, another draft physics video presentation. Fish analogy. Yeah, it works. Mostly. To some extent. So anyway, I guess we'll just do some debunking of the debunkers. Something like that. People with arguments that are just, pretty poor. So anyway, Franklin who doesn't put many physics videos on his channel for whatever unknown reason. But anyway, so he has a 16-second clip of some phenomenon that is supposed to be interesting in some way that somehow nobody ever discovered before, which is just kind of silly. But anyway, play along.
Okay, this is the experiment. You can see that the PVC does repel.
So he has a piece of apparently something like styrofoam, and he put a charge on it, which means the outside of it is now acquired a charge. It's a non-conductor, and so he previously, or through whatever mechanism, this little object has a negative charge on its outside. It's an insulator, so it's just a superficial charge on the outside, and this only works with very light objects for obvious reasons, because it's a weak amount. It's just on the surface. It's an insulator. So you could say it's positive in the center. You could say it's, a bunch of little magnets facing out this way. North side out, south side in. And he puts a charged object, likewise an insulator with charge on the outside, and they repel. Okay, so far so good. Not too complicated. Yeah, play a little bit more.
The foam block quite significantly. Does not want to be attracted, but if you bring it close enough.
Okay, so you force contact. So now he's taken this and moved it right into this object. Now, quite obviously, that we could argue that this is the more substantially charged object. So when he takes this object, okay, and he moves it right next to this object, and they make contact, so the tension on the string is stronger than the amount of the repulsion because it's a weak amount of charge. So even though it's got a little atoms are shooting back and forth force, the force isn't strong enough, even at an infinitely small distance, to repel the strong force down from gravity on the string, the tension. So anyway, they make contact. Well, once they make contact, what's happened is this is all negative, and this is all negative, and so they attract in the sense that this magnet now says screw it, and it just says, okay, this is all negative, well then I'm going to make this surface, okay, positive, and I'll make this surface negative. I'll change the balance of the charge. There's always a balance, it's just pushing the balance, it's just recreating the balance, and no matter where you put charge, it always tries to create balance in the object, in the sense that the positive and the negative is always going somewhere. So anyway, so now it just essentially envelops the negative charge is now this, and this has just essentially become a magnet in the sense that this is negative, this is positive, this is negative, this is positive kind of thing. No, well, this is negative all the way on the outside anyway, so this is negative, this is positive. So this side becomes positive to meet the negative. So it just flips this positive that was in the center, and it just moves that positive here to this surface. So now they're compatible. And now it just spreads it and evens out and creates balance again. So now they're stuck together, but again, it's a weak bond. And as soon as he pulls them apart, that is, this creates enough tension to break that little weak bond, this is going to become negative again because most of the surface is negative. And then the positive will just move right back to the middle, and this will become repulsive again. So nothing special happened here. It's just the fact that, yes, you can move charges on insulators. You can, it's not that hard to move them because they're superficial, and it's a lightweight material, and all these arguments you can make. So nothing terribly interesting happened, except the surface charge went positive here because this was a negative, and it's just like magnets. So if I bring a north pole into a north pole on a magnet, they're going to repel, but let's put the south poles on now, and let's understand this is the stronger magnet. what's this magnet going to do is it's going to flip. You know, this end's going to flip over here. It's going to be the south end now against the north end. And in a sense, all that's happened here is the magnet has flipped. The charge has flipped. Even though the charge positive was in the center, it just flipped over to here. And so instead of being pointed, you know, instead of radiating from the center out, you know, it's because of the circumstance, it became more convenient for it to radiate this way. And that's all that happened. You know, nothing mysterious. So this isn't really, you know, again, they always, the tinfoil hatters always rely on these little tiny shreds of look, there's something wrong with their theory about charge. No, there's nothing wrong with their theory about charge. Everything else they got wrong, but charge they got pretty right.
Force suddenly becomes attractive.
Yes, but it's just incidental because the charges can move. Okay, surface charges can be moved on, again, materials that are semiconductors, essentially. I mean, all insulators are to some extent semiconductors. So, not terribly fascinating. Alright, well, maybe we do a comment in here. Yeah, there wasn't anything in here worth mentioning. Alright, great video, yes. Of course it was great. All my videos are great, frankly. Oh, a nice long comment from some loony. So anyway, I don't think you understand the uncertainty principle. So this is just more horse shit. Obviously you haven't watched enough of my videos. I fully understand that you're not saying we can't tell. You're saying we believe. The truth is you can't tell. That still exists as a fact, okay? That you don't have any evidence. You're just telling me you believe in God. Okay. Anyway, it's not because we can't detect momentum and position. Yes, it is. You couldn't get away with this preposterous nonsense if we could detect it. Because if we could detect them, you'd see, oh, yeah, they are right there. That the light really does go right next to the surface, some of the photons, and some of the photons go right through the middle. And that's a real fact, and it's a real different atmosphere they're going through, and they have a different reaction because of that. And that's the truth. All right, your fairy tale that somehow it's all random here. Like, no matter where it goes through the slit, it gets a random number. It gets to roll the dice again. It's not rolling the same dice. It's rolling fundamentally different dice in the different positions. So they're basically saying, look, if we couldn't see, okay, at the crap table, if we couldn't see the walls of the crap table, and we couldn't see the dice bouncing, we couldn't see them turning in space, and we couldn't take a slow motion film of the dice table, they could get away with some nonsense like, when you throw the dice into the ether, the dice don't know where they are, and they're confused, and they're randomized. You could get away with that nonsense because we wouldn't have a videotape of it to say, no, they don't do any of that. Look, they're tumbling through the air. They're always in a position. They're always a physical thing. There's no superpositions anywhere. None of the dice went to Pluto. None of that crap happened. All of that's your fantasy. You wouldn't be able to get away with this nonsense if we could take a videotape of reality, because then the game would be over and you'd be stuck with reality. Just like your frames of bullshit, your time frames. They don't exist as a reality. They're just a figment of your imagination. And yes, we can't falsify your claims because we don't have the videotape to play. But that's the only reason, right? You could go into court and say, it was an invisible duck that, took the money out of his wallet. You can say anything. The idea is you have to have evidence, and you don't have any. Ugh, anyway. Because we can't detect the momentum and position of a particle sharply, that we attribute the uncertainty to them. Yes, I know you do it because you're religious kooks. There's absolutely no good reason to believe the elemental universe has magic powers, that the things in the elemental universe can do things the regular dice can't, that they can do magical superposition things. There's absolutely no good reason to think there's where all the magical powers are. You've given all the magic to the things we don't have a videotape of. Is that just a coincidence? All the things that we can't videotape, you say have magic powers. That's just a coincidence? No, it's not just a coincidence. You're a religious kook. Okay. If you want to really understand it, there's nothing to understand. You're a religious kook. You're a dupe. You're a silly person watching a magic show and you're falling for it. You're trying to come up with some explanation that says there's actually no pigeon strapped up inside the guy's sleeve. You think there's actually poofing pigeons, for fuck's sake. You're a dupe. Ugh. Okay, if you want to really understand it, you need to accept that particles have wave-like properties. Yes, a field of soldiers can look like waves. I can make them march in a wave-like way. Okay, but that is the only way a particle has wave-like properties, is when there's a billion of them and you arrange them in an order. Then they have a wave-like property. But it doesn't mean anything because they're individual soldiers going to have individual reactions with the world, and the wave has no continuity. The soldiers aren't tied to each other with ropes. The soldiers don't have steel bars running through their heads tying them all together. There's absolutely no meaning to the wave except in the fact that if you actually do push a bunch of soldiers all at once on a door, for example, like all 10 of them move in sequence on the door, they will be able to push down doors that one soldier can't push down. No matter how many times he tries, he won't succeed. That's all. There's just a circumstantial fact that wave-like behavior will sometimes allow you to do things you can't do as individuals. Period. But that's it. That's all you have evidence of. All right. Here is one of the earlier experiments about electronics. So what this is a Wikipedia thing. Division gamer experiment. Oh, I'm sure that's going to be of some value. I'll look at it in the future. And bore it a new asshole as evidence of any fucking thing. Okay, where assigning a wavelength to an electron helped explain the diffraction pattern. Well, I'm sorry, that's just absolute nonsense, okay? Your silly interactions in space bullshit is nonsense. It doesn't happen. Do the radar experiment, okay? Okay, I thought of another way to do the double slit experiment to abolish all of this wooey nonsense. It's kind of a simple modification, but they've never done any of this stuff because they're not trying to find the truth. That's the fact. They don't want to understand any of these experiments. They just want to use the quote mine. They just want to quote mine them for the parts they like. They've never really talked about how, the thickness of the slit, they never talk about that. What does that do to the pattern? Oh yeah, that's irrelevant, right? All right, so you have a slit, right? And the idea would be is, yes, you send light through the slits, and then what we would do is just have the impediment mobile. So you just have the smaller impediment, and you just move it into position from the outside in, right? And that will change your little bar pattern, obviously. So you have this little bar pattern from the single slit. All right, and then so you start with that, and then as you move this in, then you can sit there and prove that where there was light, there's now dark, and all that kind of crap. And it would be based on the fact that this, when you move it into this position, see here it's irrelevant. So at a distance, it's infecting so few photons that it won't change the pattern at all. But as you move it closer and closer to the two slits, it will involve more and more photons, and so therefore will have more and more of an effect on your pattern, and you'll be able to see it. Now, I would argue that what's going to happen is this thing and this thing and this thing are all covered in electrons, and they all react to each other. Okay, so they all compress the electrons around them, and that's what you'll see. You'll see this constantly creating the balance, just like in the little styrofoam charge thing. They're going to constantly change the balance of the charges, which means the electrons are going to get closer together and create more pressure, and then they're going to get further apart, and there's going to be more and less space, right? The small object doesn't have enough space for all the electrons, right? They can't roll this way. You know, they can't just go this way. See, this thing, the electrons can go that way fairly freely. But on this small object, the electrons can't go that way, so they have to go this way and this way. You know, they have to go further away in different directions than they're allowed to do on the slits, and that's what you're going to find. But anyway, it's a worthwhile experiment to dissect the real problem with your quote mining has never explained the fact that there's two patterns in the double slit that water waves don't do. Unlike water waves, the two slit in light does this thing, right? You see those? Well, you can see enough of it. You know, bar, 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 and bar, 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 bar. So there's bars. There's two patterns actually in the pattern, and they don't have any explanation for that. All they have an explanation for is this. They don't have an explanation for this. Okay, help to explain the diffraction pattern. So it's just amazing. The diffraction is the spread. So let's understand the two different things. The interference pattern is the bars. Diffraction is just the spreading part. They're two different phenomenons, in fact. And all the bars are created by is the places where you can reconstruct photons. You're breaking them by making photons pass through objects. Photons have very large polarization. 2,000 atoms worth of polarization. They're very big, okay, a photon. The little bits inside are very small, but the spread of your wave of photon is very large. And so pieces are easily broken off, and all you're doing is reconstructing. So there's places where you put back together a photon and places where you don't because the geometry's wrong. They're out of phase. You can't reconstruct the frequency. That's all there is, fella. Your little poofy theories are just bullshit. They're silly. They're silly on their face, and the deeper you go in and look to see how why you believed in them, it gets sillier and sillier because the evidence is so inconclusive. It is so tiny. It seems like. It doesn't really when you look at it. I mean, we know why water waves change is because the water waves going through a slit are sticking to the surfaces and slowing down. We know why it happens in water waves. Oh, God. Anyway, and we know photons don't do that sticking thing. Okay. Diffraction pattern in a more familiar double slit experiment. So again, there's nothing even obvious about how they do the double slit with electrons, because they're doing them inside electron microscopes. Right? I mean, it's they're not like putting two big slits up and just shooting electrons through. It's nothing obvious like that. And clearly electrons don't have a frequency. They don't have a wavelength. They don't have any of that stuff. You'd have to send a bunch of electrons on purpose, like a radio wave. That's the only way you can create a frequency out of them, because they don't have any innate frequency. Okay, we need to attribute the wave function to each particle to describe their position on the screen. You need to. A rational person doesn't need to. And a rational person can dissect the obvious, which is the electron is going to go through a medium. It's going through, you created an obstacle. You don't understand the obstacle has an implication. So you actually think that an object in space, right? So this is the surface of a piece of steel even. You actually think it's clearly there's just a Planck constant of thinness here. There's no atmosphere between the air and the steel at all. It's just either a steel atom and a steel atom it's just a round atom that says I'm steel. It doesn't have electrons on the outside of it, right? So you actually think that the surface isn't something that has mostly electrons on it. You don't think that's the way reality works. That the atom is mostly empty space, and the empty space of the surface is electron heavy. There's not some proton sticking its ass out here somewhere, right? Because the protons are in the nucleus, right? So you do understand that there's no possibility that the atom is sitting there going, look, see my proton ass sitting here? That's not really happening, right? You understand that, don't you? Oh, no, of course you don't understand it. But if I understood it, you'd understand that this is covered with electrons. and there's atoms bubbling off of this thing, moving, jiggling. So there's a whole area here that's full of what you call a corona, the corona of the object, because it has some thermal temperature. It's creating a corona, all right, a bubbling little atmosphere of atomic bits. And you're shooting your electrons through the atomic bits this way. When you shoot them through this way, they get diffracted. Okay, but when you shoot them through this way, they get all fucked up. And you're surprised that their fucked upness sends them to these different locations. Now, they go to all these locations, and the truth is that, yes, you can only reconstruct something usually by having the right geometry to create enough of an impact to create what we see as visible. So more than one electron has to hit a location before this panel says, oh yes, I see an electron. So you're really just saying how many electrons hit. But the electrons get deflected. Simple answer. The two patterns aren't identical. Okay, in visible light, the patterns are very blocky, very unsloped on their edges, so to speak. They don't gradually go from dark to light like the math says they're supposed to. Now in electrons, they do. Very gradual up, very gradual down, on, off, very gradual. So the fact that your theory comes up with very different results, and they are very different, indicates your theory is silly. All right. To make it simple, yeah, go fuck yourself. You know, you to what? To fool me with your God theory and your quote mined evidence? No, thank you. If we want to have a localized particle, if we do, yes, you, the special people, your little special physics bus, we need the wave function to be the sum of many waves with different wavelengths. So more just horse shit. I'm sorry you need that. Yeah, I'm sorry for you. The more precise we want the position to be, the more wavelengths we need. Whatever. Since the wavelengths of the particle is inversely proportional to its momentum, which again is a false notion. Frequency is only incidentally important. As I pointed out with the door, knocking the door over argument, or pushing a car out of the mud argument, you need to have your energy additive rather than subtractive. So you need to apply it at the right frequency to be able to get anything to happen. But it has nothing to do with the... what the hell did that happen for? I didn't hit anything. Annoying. That's not what I want. I want the comments. What the hell did it do to the comments? It always does this. Haven't responded to yet thing, which is so fucking annoying. Ugh, crap. Alright. To make it simple, if we want the localized particle, we need the wave function to be the sum of many waves with different wavelengths. Well, this different wavelength thing doesn't work, right? Because the electrons all have the same velocity, so that doesn't even make any sense. The more precise we want the position to be, the more wavelengths we need. So I don't even know what he's talking about there, because it's not applicable to the experiment he cited, since the wavelengths of the particle is inversely proportional to the momentum. So again, this is the nonsense part, right? Frequency equals momentum. No, velocity and mass equals momentum. All right, and you can pretend that frequency is momentum, but it's not, and it only has a circumstantial effect. The fact is, the only way photons are really relevant is the fact that they hit electrons. It's electrodynamics, okay? Quantum electrodynamics. That's what the subject really is. It's just about how the photon type energy interacts with electrons. And that's all you're measuring. And the truth is that if you hit electrons repeatedly, they don't get to rebound to their position, and therefore you can hit them out of their position. But if you hit them too slowly, they just rebound and they rebound and they rebound and they rebound. So it's a tipping argument I've made millions of times on this channel now, right? It's literally a million. I think the tipping point statement has been made actually a million times. But you couldn't care less about understanding what my theory really is. Okay. The more precise the position, the wavelengths, since the wavelengths inverse, no, it's not proportional to the momentum. Decreasing the uncertainty of the position increases the uncertainty of the momentum and vice versa. No, only in your fantasy. And that's all it is. It's just a silly fantasy. Perfect precision in one value would imply infinite uncertainty in the other. And so you believe in infinities even. You think this slit pattern actually goes infinitely sideways. Yet not one single time has anybody taken any photographic film and put them parallel to the experiment and said, let's detect those photons going really funky. The ones going to Pluto. Let's detect some of those. Have you ever done those experiments? No. Because guess what? Your results would be, hey, there's no photons going there. This game seems to completely run out of energy right about here, right? You go out here, all of a sudden there's no photons anymore. There's not photons going way over there and way over there and way over. No, there's none of that's actually happening, retard. You're so delusional. The pattern is dictated by how many electrons you can hit. Each one of those little bars, each one of those represents a hitting an electron. So the more electrons you hit, the more further out you go. But if you don't have enough electrons to hit, there's nowhere further to go. That's why the pattern spreads out. It's because each hit is moving, they're diffracting it more, but there's less place to go because there's not enough electrons to hit anymore. So when you make the slit really, really narrow, all the electrons have to get the hell out of there because there's not enough room for the electrons in there. So you can only hit a few electrons. So as you make the slits narrow and narrow and narrow, there's less and less electrons. But each electron is under more pressure. So it bends the light more, but there's less capacity to hit numerous electrons. So you can't get way over there anymore. There's only a certain number of bars available, okay? They don't go infinitely. Your theory is they go forever. Prove that. Take a picture of that. You could do it. Photographic film, you let it run for a couple of days. Put the photographic film way out here, right? So you have your pattern. Put the photographic film out here and out here. Okay, and then run the experiment for a month or a year and see how many photons actually go out there. Because you know what you're going to find? Zero. Okay. Perfect position in one value. Okay. This is not just a property of particles, but it is fundamental to wave-like systems. So again, you can keep saying it is. You have no evidence of a wave in anything. You don't have evidence of the existence of a magnetic field or an electric field or any of this crap. They're all figments of your imagination. They're all things you made up as explanations because you didn't think in any kind of rational way about, hey, guess what? That's an impediment I'm putting there in front of the photon. What is a photon? Oh, well, let's think about photons' polarization. It means a photon is a big thing, okay? Thousands of atoms worth of polarization. One photon is thousands of atoms thick. It goes through space. It hits thousands of atoms when it lands. Thousands of them. Not just one. Well, it's less than thousands, but I'm just mean as an area. Well, it's more than thousands, actually. The area of the photon is defined, again, by polarization, tells you how big the thing is. The fact that polarizing film works is telling you there's a huge spread in the photon. Anyway. Okay, particle C. Another Wikipedia page, uncertainty principle. I don't need to see it. I understand your silly principle. It's a silly invisible man theory. You have no evidence for it at all that anything turns into a wave function, that an electron isn't a real thing in real places in space. And from every single experiment, you can rationally go right back with a mechanical line and keep everything in straight lines. There's nothing that happens that's outside the boundaries of a rational explanation. It's just you don't want a rational explanation. Fucking Skyrim fantasy characters. You want to live in a fake, phony world. You don't want to deal with reality. Jeez. For once, I'd like to witness any honest... Oh, this is Mrs. Tree, who doesn't like me reading anyway, so the hell with it. It's probably poetry of some kind. Alright, so we're done with that. I guess I'll take a break and then... yeah, maybe I'll go up an ass that I shouldn't go anywhere near. But I'm such a brave explorer, Yeah, I'll go to the darkest, black, stinky hole there is in YouTube space. All right, so this is an argument by a petty lunatic who hates me, and therefore he has to just lie and make up crap to try to debunk me in some way. So he has to try to find something he can pick at because he's desperate and he's got a hurt ego, blah 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 blah. In other words, a psycho. yeah, he's living for his emotional problem. And he isn't smart enough to figure out he has one. So anyway, let's just play it and deal with these so insanely superficial arguments.
In this live stream video recording, we're going to be sussing through some of the main
whatever a sussing is.
Major flaws with Inmendham's supposedly.
So major flaw, blah 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 blah. No, their theory has all the major flaws: the lack of unification, the insane wooey religious functions, the dark energy, the dark matter, the invisible bent space thingy. The whole thing is made out of invisible men. I don't have the invisible man problem. Ugh. Pathetic.
Rational theory of reality. Yeah, we're just going to go through it. You guys can read through this. I mean, I'm not...
He won't go through any of it, okay? So we already know that. He won't touch a single actual quote.
I'm going to check it out right now because I've already read through it before. We're just going to go down to the conclusion for the conclusion's sake. This is like one of the only things I've ever seen Gary write down that's, of his ideas, and it's fucking pathetic. So
it's the only thing he's seen, therefore that's all that's ever been done, which is also pathetic as an accusation, right? It's pathetic when you say, I haven't seen you do anything, whatever. You can say it to anybody. Anybody who has any skills at all. You could say, I never saw you, a guy could win 15 tournaments in golf or something. You could say, I never saw you hit a ball straight. So what? You never saw it? Okay, well, there's videos. Shit. It's just so lame. So anyway, he's not going to actually read from the website, so I figure maybe we should do that. But, he's not going to sit there and say, oh, that's a silly drawing of how a magnet works, when this is actually how the magnet works. This is the rational description. They don't have a drawing. Let's understand. They can't draw a magnet because it has invisible ducts in it. The virtual photons they fly, never mind. Here's a mathematical equation. There. Do you understand it? It's that bad. Well, anyway. And again, I've pointed out the website is incomplete. I mean, this is stuff I wrote years ago, and the theory has improved since then. But you could certainly, this first page is perfectly adequate. But he won't even talk about what the theory is. All right. So we'll see what he says, and then we'll say, hey, you didn't even quote it at all.
He claims that that this works with the current model of physics.
No, it doesn't work with the current model. It's a complete competition with it. It's something stated like evolution. It's presented as a counter theory to the God theory. So their theory has a bunch of woo and crap in it. My theory has 2 kinds of force, 2 kinds of matter bit, and 2 interactions. And that's the whole physics right there. All of those things explain every experiment ever conducted. Okay, except, like I said, the ones that are magical. The LIGOs, what they do in accelerators and stuff. That stuff is so abstract and so disconnected from anything called a photograph that there's no point in even talking about it. Yes, my theory doesn't think photons are magically bent twice as much by gravity. It doesn't have that in it. And it certainly doesn't have even photons being bent by gravity at all, because why the hell would they be? It's a silly idea. And there's no evidence that they are, because they can't redo the experiments where they claim we proved it. And the whole fucking scientific model, the model of what science is supposed to be one of those rules is you can't just make a claim that I saw Jesus walk on water. You have to make a videotape of it, or you have to have Jesus keep performing the act so you can prove that he really does do it. You can't just have one guy say, I walked on water. That's not good enough. It's not evidence of anything.
And that he just concedes that he has no tests for it. So he's
Okay, I don't know where this concedes. I don't have any tests for it thing came from, right? So he just lies constantly. There's never have I ever said that. I've proposed all kinds of experiments. I've proposed that physics actually perform the experiments they claim they did. Like they claim they did detector experiments with the two-slit experiment. Show me one. Because they haven't done them, okay? They just lie overtly about the truth. There's no such experiments. They claim the Young experiment was innovative and blew all their minds, when there's nothing in the Young experiment that Newton didn't already have done 100 years before him. I mean, I've already gone through all of this stuff. I mean, their evidence sucks. That's the point I'm making. And I've pointed out that, yes, do these radar experiments, do the Eddington experiment, do them. Because you're not going to be happy with the results, okay? Do the Eddington experiment from space. Use maximum technology to do it the right way. And guess what? Your results are going to indicate that your theory is crap. I'm all for experiments. Do as many as possible. But again, all we have is the evidence. I'm saying, look, here's the evidence, the big pile of experiments. Electrons doing this, electrons doing that, photons doing this, photons doing that. I'm providing an explanation that has 2 plus 2 plus 2 as its parts. They're providing an explanation that's not unified, okay, that has completely conflicting mechanisms running the universe, bent space versus virtual photon, and their explanations, bent space and virtual photons, are completely invisible. Nobody can test them. Nobody can do anything. They're just walking into court and saying, the Invisible Man did it. Here's the theory of how the Invisible Man, he walked through here, he did this, he stuck the knife in there, he sprinkled some fake DNA, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I can make that theory work, but it's just a pile of crap. It's just made up mush. Okay, I'm saying I have a theory that's much better than that has actual mechanical things that happen in the real world, not magical things that don't happen in the real world. That's all. I win Occam's razor. I give you the simple answer, the easy answer, the one that's mechanically doesn't require anything fancy to happen, and they give you a whole pile of woo. Entanglement, ESP particles, radar particles, multiverses, all kinds of magical solutions. That's it. That's all there is. There's a competition between the bizarre explanation and the rationally bound explanation.
Claiming to have a fully rational outline for for physics that it goes against the standard model, and he provides no tests.
Again, I have to just meet the evidence. So I provide lots of evidence in the sense I cite the experiments, okay? I cite the experimental results and what actually happened, and I point out how this works just as well. Just like in the radar experiment, I point out that there's absolutely, the jamming geometry is exactly the same. And then I point out how, well, when you put a sound wave on the carrier, okay, and then go to amplify the signal, that's where you're creating the increase in the volume. See, when you turn something that isn't a sine wave, like just an on and off, and you turn it into a sine wave, you turn it into a big giant thing, right? So when you make the amplitude twice as high to amplify it, you make the volume of the signal 4 times larger. Get it? No, of course you don't get it, because you're an idiot. You don't know anything about physics, and yet you're critiquing. You're such an arrogant, obnoxious, ignorant cunt. Where did you get? You haven't done any of the work necessary to have an informed opinion, and here you are spouting your opinion. You think physics is just something, well, I'll just sit here and talk out of my ass. Where did you do the work? Where's there evidence you did any work at all to understand the subject? Oh, that's right, you haven't done any. Oh, you're such an obnoxious troll.
Okay, that is beyond pathetic. That is in the same department as crazy Muslim people saying that...
Crazy Muslim people are against who? Crazy Christian people? So I guess, what is your comparison? I'm clearly saying, look, I wish we had more evidence, okay? I wish physics would actually do rational experiments. So instead of spending billions of dollars on LIGO and accelerators, I wish they would spend a few $1 million, okay, analyzing photon interference patterns. I wish they would allocate a few little resources to these elemental questions. Again, it would cost less than $1 million, a lot less. Like the Hubble telescope is supposed to be outdated, right? It's going to be thrown into dumpster essentially with this new telescope. So when that happens, then they don't have any excuses and worries about, oh, we're going to burn our precious telescope if we put it anywhere near the sun, blah, 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 all this wimpy bullshit. It's just a pile of shit anyway. And then they can take the best telescope we have in space and do the Eddington experiment and prove once and for all whether the sun is bending any fucking photons outside of its corona. I mean, you already have a NASA engineer who's already pointed out that in the 20 years he worked for NASA using laser technology and, you know, doing all this stuff, they never saw a photon bent outside the corona of the sun. That they have no evidence of a photon ever being bent outside the sun's corona, which means that all they've ever seen bent are photons that were scattered. That's the implication. The only ones bent are the ones going through the medium, the ones going through the corona. Yes, of course they get bent. They get scattered. And some of them get bent a short path, some of them get bent a very long path.
You know, it's the same type of reasoning skills as saying, like what Muslim people say when they say that Allah made mathematics because the Quran, though. Or like when...
So these analogies have absolutely nothing to do with the truth, right? They have nothing to do with the fact that they have an explanation for a cause that they're citing for the effect. I'm citing a different cause. Now, what you have to point out is how my causes are somehow irrational compared to their causes. When I would say if any honest person looks at the two descriptions of a cause, they're saying that when on the small universe, the dice aren't really dice. And they don't fly through the air and tumble. They don't hit objects and bounce off them with specific impacts and specific energy. No, there's this magical thing. The dice turn into all the dice in the universe, and they float around in amorphous space, and they decide to do some calculus and figure out where they should go. That's their theory, shit for brain. And it's preposterous, it's nonsense, it's on its face a silly explanation.
Christians, it's the exact same thing that Christian crazies do when they say evolution works perfectly in the model of the Bible. It's called unfalsifiability.
Well, great. If you could do that, like I said, that's an honest, legitimate argument they can make. If they want to say that God put a bunch of dinosaur bones into the ground to fool us, okay, then because God is such a great guy and he has nothing better to do than trick us. He's such an honest God. He wants to have this honest relationship with me, and yet he'll put dragons in the ground or something, right? Big giant beasties that he doesn't talk about in his creation model. But he put them in there just to fuck with my head, right? Because he wants to have this honest relationship. Yeah, right. Yeah, they can make the argument, can't they? See, you're not gonna point out how silly my physics is. You're not going to do what I just did, which is say that would be a silly theory of God, that God just put dinosaur bones in the ground to test our faith, to force us to go to hell. That's what he put up there. I can make more of them go to hell by putting dinosaur bones in the ground because then they won't believe in me. So I'll do that just to fuck with them so I can send them to hell. If that's God, why would I want to hang out with that lunatic? So that theory doesn't make any sense, does it? Yeah, so I falsified it by pointing out that it's silly, shithead. Point out how my theory is silly, shithead. Take an actual quote from it and point out how that can't be because that's stupid. Do that, shit for brain.
And I'm going to familiarize you guys with that word here. Okay, this is the word unfalsifiability.
Right, and just jargon, right? I mean, I've never used this argument from unfalsifiability ever, okay? It is the most bogus, silly, stupid argument there is because obviously many of the most fundamental and precious ideas of science are unfalsifiable in their current condition. You can't falsify them. You can't falsify dark energy, dark matter, bent space, any of those things. Quantum mechanics, in every respect of quantum mechanics, is unfalsifiable. Okay, there's no way to glean evidence of the non-existence of the invisible force. There's just no way to do that. So what? You're still just saying, here's the evidence and here's your theory. Okay, and here's a counter theory and a counter theory and which one is a better explanation? Evolution wins because it's a nice logical explanation for what exists. God is a silly explanation.
It's just the description is just exactly what Gary is doing in that conclusion, and all throughout his.
Okay, so let's read the conclusion, right? Because I don't think I did that in the conclusion, so I think that's just another one of his fucking lies. And I said, in this paper, I have outlined a clear path to the unification of gravity. So I did that, okay? I pointed out how gravity can be unified with the other forces by understanding that what is really happening in the universe is energy is getting trapped. Blah, 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 blah. The electromagnetic spectrum, time dilation, and magnetism. Okay, the purpose is to merely establish a foundation for the larger claim that all energetic force is just a variant manifestation of the migration of elemental quanta. So what's really moving is the quanta. It's moving the speed of light. When it stops, when it gets in a trap, and it doesn't move in a direction in the speed of light, but it moves back and forth, or it moves in a square, or it moves in a circle, then it's not getting where it was going. And that's important to the thing that was waiting for it. Okay, technically. But the only thing moving is the force. That's it. And the traps process through space. Okay. The truth to be revealed and hopefully accepted is that the universe is incomprehensibly thick with energy, and that we only see a fraction. No, we only see and function in. We only see and function in a minute portion of that universe labeled with specific polarization and frequency. So we only see the imbalances. What I could have said simply enough, but we only see when something gets trapped. All right, it should be understood that this paper is only intended to be complete enough to justify fair testing and review. So he says it's fair testing just to say it's unfalsifiable. I fairly tested your idea. Your explanation, I'm just going to throw it out because somehow it's unfalsifiable. When I never said it was unfalsifiable. You could falsify it tomorrow by actually proving light is bent. Okay, by twice as much as every other form of matter in the universe. So you could falsify it simply by actually proving one of your assertions to be true. That if you prove to me that particles are entangled, yes, then you falsified my theory because there's absolutely no good reason for anything to be entangled. That's just nonsense. Okay. The author sincerely has no bad faith knowledge of any existing well-proven fact of mathematics or conceptual vision destructive to the viability of this theoretical perspective. So it's a theory presented as an alternative explanation to their wooey nonsense, and I honestly have no understanding that there is any experiment that proves my theory to be incompatible with the facts. There's no experiment that demonstrates a fact that's incompatible, okay, with my theory. I'm saying you haven't demonstrated that light is bent by gravity. That's for certain. You certainly haven't demonstrated that anything is entangled. And the rest of the physics, the rudimentary physics, it explains the two-slit experiment, explains all these things, these phenomenon, and explains them with rational causes. Anyway, it has been the author's experience that this new model easily conforms to existing science. So that's all it's saying. This, by existing science, I'm talking about the existing experiments. Maybe I have to say that more explicitly. It clearly doesn't conform to dark matter, dark energy, all of that mush. Okay. And provides solid answers to long asked questions. It explains how magnets work, which nobody else has done rationally. It provides a rational explanation for where the energy comes from for two magnets to move together. Why they turn, why everything they do can be explained as a mechanical process. Something nobody in the history of mankind has done rationally. Okay. Enough said. And it will be, again, this diagram of a magnet will not be debunked in any way as a fundamentally viable explanation for why magnets are magnets.
Theory. It's that he's confidently asserting that, if you guys read it, he's confidently asserting that a theory or hypothesis is true or false, even though the theory or hypothesis cannot possibly be contradicted by...
Yes, it can. See, all it had to do was fail to answer one of the questions. All it had to do was fail to be compatible with one experiment. All you need, as Einstein says, all you need is one experiment to show me it wrong. You just need one. Is that asking too much? So it's compatible with all the experimental results. I mean, again, except for the way abstract ones, okay? I mean, the ones where they say, you know, what's his name again? It's Alan Aspect. You know, the famous, you know, entanglement experiment. Yeah, no, I'm saying you have to do that experiment better, okay? Because it's just a piece of crap. You measured a photon here and then you measured the same photon here. I don't believe you. Prove that, okay, before I believe.
an observation, okay, because he claims that it works perfectly with the current model of physics.
Again, it doesn't work with the current model of physics. I've never said that, so that's a lie. Okay, what do you want me to say? You can't be, and you have to be a little bit precise here. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the current model is a pile of shit. Okay, the standard model is a pile of crap as a model. It's made of all invisible men all over the place. Dark matter, dark energy, invisible virtual photons, invisible power space. It's all invisible man. There isn't anything real in their foundational understanding of reality.
And doesn't provide any tests at all.
So again, I have provided a ton of tests. I mean, as many as I can think of, right? I mean, this is very difficult to see these little tiny things. All we can see is their consequences. All right? All we can see is what they do. We can't see how they do it. So we have to decipher it from the evidence. I'm deciphering a real criminal committing a real crime. They're deciphering it as invisible ducks doing invisible duck things.
For 5 years. That's some remarkable arrogance, okay? So it cannot be possibly be contradicted by an observation or the outcome of any...
So again, oh, he has to have a commercial 41 seconds into the video. That's just so cool. Desperate turd. Finish the fucking commercial. Amazing.
Of any physical experiment.
They monetize crap like this. So again, I'm all for physical experiments. I'm all for do more of them. The argument is that my physics meets the experiments better and simpler, more complete and simpler. It provides a better explanation for a phenomenon, a more complete explanation for things like a magnet, okay, and it's much, much simpler. That's all there is here. You think there's some other thing that somebody can do besides meet the evidence? There's no other alternative. That's the only way you can prove anything, is to meet the evidence. I've met the evidence with a simpler, more complete model.
Usually without strong evidence or good reasons, and that's exactly what we have here.
So you're just a liar. That's not exactly what you have here. So again, I didn't just say... like I said, I didn't just make a God theory. It's a very complete theory in the sense, and it's very explicit. It identifies real things as real things existing. There's real forces. I pointed out a photon is made out of real elements that are at a frequency and they have a certain spread. I've made explicit claims that would be easily debunked if they weren't within the range of plausible. They're completely plausible as an explanation. They're perfectly consistent with what we see, idiot.
Here's a number of tests like proving general relativity.
Oh, no, there are no tests that prove it. I've already been over those. So this is the big joke, right? He has no knowledge of physics, and yet he thinks this proves something. These experiments prove something. It's already pointed out that GPS, Einstein's equations aren't used. It's just bullshit. I've already pointed out how the precession of Mercury is easily explained as the precession of the center of the sun's gravity. It's a perfectly viable explanation. It explains why Mercury's affected more than any of the other planets, because Mercury is so much closer to the sun. But it's actually happening to all the other planets, but it means almost nothing because the precession is so small that only something very close can feel it.
You guys can check this out if you'd like. This is the table of contents. I mean, there are, more than a half dozen tests that verify general relativity. Okay.
No, okay, they don't. They verify a relationship between velocity and clocks breaking, and that's the only evidence they have. So here he's such an ignorant fuck. He's making an extraordinary claim. He's saying, I know all those experiments are right and all those conclusions they drew are correct. Where are you going to show me how all the conclusions they drew are correct? It's like saying, because one physicist says there's a universe created every time there's a photonic interaction in the universe, you say it's completely correct. It's been verified. It's been proven. No, it hasn't. The evidence, go through the evidence. Like I say, he's not going to bother testing their theory. He's not going to bother testing the consistency of their claim with the strength of the evidence from which they're basing the claim. Again, there's only evidence that clocks break. There's no evidence that time in any way ever changes.
There are more than a half dozen that verify special relativity. A lot of them come down to equations used in dozens of different companies by thousands of different, hundreds.
All right, so that's another statement you're making. Do you have any evidence that that's true? I can give you other alternative evidence, right? I mean, a guy who works in GPS made millions of dollars in GPS and points out how he never used an equation in his life, okay? He didn't need one. You just adjust the clocks until it's right. You don't bother with equations. So again, more nonsense.
Of thousands, actually, of different people. So in order to, pinpoint places in the sky where they're going to have GPS satellites, how they're going to, figure out how to alter the GPS signal in your phone. That's.
So you're just making claims about the claims, and so you're saying their claims that this is how it works is true. You're not going to show that happening. So there's no web page I can go to where they do the GPS for the satellite, and show how Einstein's equation works perfectly, because it doesn't work perfectly. And that's the big lie here, okay? Because there's a general relationship, not some specific hard relationship, and it has to do with this idea of the strength of the gravity and how much it's wobbling the satellite. It's really just about the wobble. So I've given the analogy that perfectly fits. The basketball player runs at a velocity, okay? But the ball is actually going much, much faster because it's traveling so much more distance as he's dribbling it. Okay, so the ball is actually going so much faster than the player.
All done with equations that are milled over by thousands of different people, and it's all because of what Einstein's relativity. So he's asserting that Einstein's theory of relativity is thoroughly evidenced, as if it's like evolution. There's so much evidence. It's so thick. It's so high. It's so tall. It's so solid. When it's thin, vaporous, way overhyped, and way overstated. And that's all. What are you going to tell me next, that the computer was invented by quantum mechanics? Because it wasn't. You won't be able to provide any evidence. You want to show how the blue LED was created by quantum mechanics? Well, it wasn't. The evidence is it took 26 years of people just fucking with it. Just trying different things to see if they could make it work better. No evidence. And he is confidently and arrogantly and calling people stupid for 5 fucking years.
No, I'm calling you religious, and that's what you people are. You're just religious dupes. You're just jumping on their religion. You don't know anything about this subject. You're just saying, I have a feeling that, yes, the universe is whoop-de-doo. Okay, that they're stupid. You don't even know what their theories actually are, and you're buying it. Okay, you haven't examined this thing at all. You're just saying, give it to me because it has my friends on it or something. I like this. I like Sean Carroll. He's cute. He sounds like Kermit the Frog. So therefore, he's right. So I believe in multiverses. You're a dupe, a simp, a retard, and you're an obnoxious, lying piece of shit.
Have a test. He doesn't even have a recommendation for a test.
So again, a flat-out lie. Okay, I mean, the last 3 videos I've put tests in them, and the last 3 videos all had tests in them, right? 4 videos. They all had tests in them. I mean, this is such a fucking lie.
He's a fucking lunatic, okay? You guys are confused as shit if you don't understand that. Yeah, I mean, I've been making that really evident. I sort of was joking around in those last videos.
You haven't made anything evident in that you're just a deplorable, petty liar. Okay, not a single fucking accusation you have made have you backed up with a single shred of fucking evidence. You're just a fucking lying troll. Okay, you have some really big fucking psycho problems with your own whatever. Okay, yes, I've defeated you just by having blonde hair, apparently, or having hair. All right, and that's gotten you all pissed off. Well, fuck you. Grow up.
Also serious, the debate videos, because I mean, obviously the consent argument failed for the unborn, fails at the beginning. It fails.
So again, he's saying consent doesn't mean anything. Okay, that it's not a way of gaining authorization. That's all I've made the argument, is that to do anything, you always want to have consent. If you can get the consent of the victim, it's always a great thing to have, and it gives you license. And if you don't have consent, that is, if they're too stupid or retarded, right, and you have to act in their benefit or act on them, then you always have to make sure you're right, right? The pressure gets huge when you have to impose. So just like your children, the pressure on you, right? Because they can't give informed consent, so you're going to have to make a decision for them: circumcision or no circumcision. You've got lots of decisions to make. Okay, and the weight is on you to make the right decision. All right, to know what you're doing. And if you don't know what the right decision is, you're really in a vulnerable position, because you're going to be deciding somebody else's fate. And they didn't say, they didn't concede to you playing games with their welfare. All right, I don't want to be a victim of your bad judgment. That's the consent argument. I have a right to be immune to your bad judgment. That's the rights argument. He's just too fucking stupid to understand it's a concept.
In the middle, it's for the unborn. So he doesn't ask for the consent of the unborn, and he's claiming consent as the universal.
You can't get it. I've said the words 4,000 times. If I can't get consent, if the person is retarded, I can't get their consent, okay? Because they can't give informed consent. So I have to, if I'm going to act, I have to act with some other authority. My authority has to come from me proving that I know what's best. That's the only way I can act on them then, is I have to know I know what's best for them. You can't figure this out? If I had consent, then I don't have to worry. If they consent to be manipulated by me, for me to pull the string, then I don't have to worry about if the thing blows up when I pull the string, because they consented to me doing the best I can. But if they didn't consent to it, then I have to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I mean, you can't. I've made the analogy so many times, and this fucking retard can't pay any attention. If my neighbor concedes and says gives me their money, I'm going to Las Vegas, and they give me their money and say, go ahead and gamble with it, I trust you, I'm off the hook. But if I take their money without their consent, all right, then I have to make sure I win. Duh! I have to be certain I'm going to win to be able to do that with any kind of thing called responsibility or reasonableness. I have to be convinced I'm winning. I have to know it's a sure thing. Simple argument. Flew right over your retarded dumbass head. Alright, if this isn't going to be a physics video, then I'll just turn it off. Whoops.
That is ridiculous. That's an immediate objection and not